Friends, I want you to imagine something with me. You turn 65 this coming spring. You have coverage through your spouse's employer plan. Good coverage, you feel fine. You figure you'll deal with Medicare when you actually need it. 3 years pass, your spouse retires, the employer coverage ends. You finally call Medicare to enroll, and the representative on the phone says something you were not expecting. Your Part B premium will be 30% higher than the standard rate, permanently. Not for 1 year, not until you hit a certain age, for the rest of your life. Not because she did anything dishonest, not because she missed some obscure filing form, because Medicare has a specific enrollment window, and nobody told her it was closing. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly how that window works, what qualifies you to delay Medicare safely, and how to make sure you never receive that phone call. You'll learn the specific 7-month window every person approaching 65 needs to know about, and why the clock starts whether Medicare notifies you or not. You'll learn the one situation where delaying Medicare is completely penalty-free, and the very similar situation where it is not, and why people confuse the two every single day. And you'll see the real dollar math. What a 30% permanent premium surcharge actually costs over a 20-year retirement. Quick note, this is education, not personalized legal or insurance advice. Please talk with a licensed Medicare specialist before making any enrollment decisions. And stay with me for the second half, because I'll show you how Karen's neighbor Frank handled the exact same situation for $0 in penalties ever. Let me start with a story I see play out in different forms over and over. There's a woman, we'll call her Karen. Karen turned 65 2 years ago. At the time, she was covered under her husband's employer health plan, a solid plan from his company. She assumed she was fine. Her husband's HR department had mentioned, you don't need Medicare while you have this coverage. And that was true. What they didn't explain was exactly when the Medicare clock would start and how to protect herself when his coverage ended. When her husband retired last month and his coverage ended, Karen called Medicare to enroll. She was calm. She had good records. She thought this would be a 15-minute phone call. Instead, the representative explained that her initial enrollment period had closed more than 2 years earlier, 3 months after she turned 65. Because she had not enrolled during that window, and because she had not qualified for a special enrollment period, a permanent penalty had attached to her Part B premium. Now let me show you Frank Karen's neighbor. Frank also turned 65 last year. He was also covered under his wife's employer plan at the time. But Frank had heard something about a Medicare enrollment deadline. He wasn't sure of the details, so 6 months before his 65th birthday, he called Medicare directly. The Medicare representative walked him through the initial enrollment period, the special enrollment period rules, and exactly what documentation he would need when his wife's coverage eventually ended. Frank enrolled at exactly the right time, with the right documentation. His premium matched the standard rate, 0 penalty, for life. Same neighborhood, same coverage situation. One phone call made 6 months earlier, and their Medicare premiums for the rest of their lives are completely different. Let me ask you, do you know exactly when your Medicare initial enrollment period opens and closes? And do you know whether your current health coverage qualifies you to delay Medicare safely? If you are not completely certain of both answers, stay with me, because the next few minutes may be the most valuable Medicare information you hear this year. To understand what happened to Karen, you need to know how the Medicare initial enrollment period actually works. When you turn 65, Medicare gives you a specific 7-month window to enroll in Part B, the the part that covers doctor visits, outpatient services, and most non-hospital medical care. That 7-month window is called the Initial Enrollment Period, the IEP. It runs from 3 months before the month you turn 65, through the month of your birthday, and then 3 months after. 7 months total. That is the window. It opens automatically. It closes automatically. Medicare does not send you a reminder that it is closing. If you enroll during this window, you pay the standard Part B premium in 2026, approximately $185 per month for most enrollees. If you do not enroll during this window and you do not have qualifying coverage, a permanent penalty begins accumulating. The penalty is 10% added to your Part B premium for every 12-month period you are eligible but not enrolled. Karen was 2 full years past her initial enrollment period without qualifying coverage. That is a permanent 30% surcharge on her Part B premium. Not 30% for 2 years, 30% forever. The penalty has no expiration date. And here is what most people do not realize. Part B also covers Part 500 drug coverage eligibility. A late Part B enrollment can create a cascade of complications for prescription drug coverage as well. Now, stay with me, because the most important piece of this conversation is the one Frank understood and Karen did not. There are 2 situations that look very similar from the outside, but have completely different outcomes when it comes to Medicare enrollment timing. Situation A. You are still actively working at age 65, and you are covered under your own current employer's group health plan. Your employer has 20 or more employees. In this situation, you qualify for a Special Enrollment Period, a CEP. You can delay Part B while you have that active employer coverage, and you will not be penalized. When your employer coverage ends because you retire, leave the job, or the plan changes, you then have 8 months to enroll in Medicare under the Special Enrollment Period without penalty. 8 months to enroll after coverage ends, not after you retire, after the coverage actually ends. That distinction matters. Situation B. You are covered as a dependent on someone else's employer plan, your spouse's plan, a parent's plan, or you have COBRA, retiree health coverage, or marketplace coverage. In most of these situations, the Special Enrollment Period does not apply. The Initial Enrollment Period clock is still running from your 65th birthday. COBRA specifically is one of the most common and most costly misunderstandings in Medicare enrollment. COBRA is real insurance. It covers your medical bills. But Medicare does not treat COBRA as qualifying employer coverage for the purposes of delaying enrollment. If you take COBRA at 65 and assume it protects your Medicare enrollment window, it does not. The IEP clock keeps running while you are on COBRA. This is exactly what happened to Karen. She had her husband's employer coverage, but as a dependent, not as an active worker herself. That coverage was real. It paid her medical bills, but it did not qualify her for a Special Enrollment Period. So her IEP window opened when she turned 65 and closed 3 months later. She missed it without knowing she had it. And Frank was also covered as a dependent on his wife's employer plan. Same situation as Karen, but Frank called Medicare 6 months early and learned the distinction. His Medicare representative told him clearly, as a dependent on a spouse's plan, you need to enroll during your initial enrollment period. Your IEP closes 3 months after your 65th birthday month. Frank enrolled in month 5 of his 7-month IEP, 2 months before it closed. Standard premium, no penalty. In a moment, I'll put the full dollar math on the table. what Karen's 30% penalty actually costs her over a 20-year retirement, and what Frank saves by comparison. But first, there are 3 more details most people miss about this window, and all 3 can matter depending on your specific situation. First detail: the month you enroll inside the IEP affects when your coverage actually starts. If you enroll in the first 3 months of your IEP, the months before your birthday month, your coverage begins the first day of your birthday month. If you enroll in your birthday month or the 3 months after, your coverage start is delayed by 1 to 3 months. This matters if you have an upcoming procedure or medical need right around your 65th birthday. Enroll early in your IEP window to avoid a coverage gap. Second detail: Part A hospital coverage is usually premium-free if you have worked and paid Medicare taxes for at least 10 years, 40 quarters. Most people enroll in Part A during their IEP even if they delay Part B. There is generally no premium for Part A if you qualify, so enrolling early in Part A carries no cost and secures your hospital coverage. Third detail: if you are still working at 65 and covered under your own employer's plan, you should also understand how HSA contributions interact with Medicare enrollment. The moment you enroll in any part of Medicare, including Part A, you must stop contributing to a health savings account. Continuing to contribute after Medicare enrollment can trigger IRS penalties. This is a detail that catches a lot of people who are still working at 65 completely by surprise. We will do a full deep dive on the HSA Medicare connection in a future video. For now, just know that this interaction exists and needs a conversation with your advisor. Alright, let's put Karen's real numbers on the table. Karen's standard Part B premium in 2026 would have been approximately $185 per month. That is what Frank pays. That is what everyone who enrolls on time pays. Karen missed her IEP by 2 full years, 24 months past the close of her enrollment window. 2 12-month periods past her window means a 20% penalty at minimum. Because of how the calculation works with her specific situation, her penalty came in at 30%. $56 more every single month. That may not sound catastrophic in isolation, but let's run the 20-year math. $56 a month over 20 years is $13,440 in additional Medicare premiums paid directly to Medicare for the same coverage Frank receives for 0 extra cost. And that calculation assumes the penalty amount stays flat. In reality, Part B premiums typically increase every year with Medicare cost adjustments. The penalty percentage stays fixed, but the dollar amount it applies to grows. Over a 25-year retirement, the realistic total additional cost from Karen's penalty could approach $18,000 to $20,000 paid entirely because of a missed 7-month window. Frank pays 0 extra for the exact same Part B coverage. Same doctors, same plan, same services. The only difference is 1 phone call Frank made 6 months before his 65th birthday. Now, I want to address something important before we go further. Is there any way out of a Part B late enrollment penalty once it has attached? In very limited circumstances, yes. If your late enrollment was due to a clear administrative error by Medicare or SSA, you may be able to request equitable relief. This requires documentation and is not guaranteed. There is also a General Enrollment Period, GAP, that runs from January through March each year. If you missed your IEP, you can enroll during the GAP, but the permanent penalty still applies, and your coverage won't start until July of that year. The GAP gives you a way in, but it does not erase the penalty. Once you have missed your IEP without qualifying coverage, the 10% per year surcharge stays with you. This is why acting before your 65th birthday, not after, is the only path to zero penalty. And before we go to the checklist, one more situation worth covering: working past 65 with your own employer coverage. If you are still actively employed at 65, working for an employer with 20 or more employees, and you are covered under that employer's group health plan as an active worker, you qualify for a special enrollment period. You can delay both Part A and Part B until you leave that job or the employer coverage ends, and then you have 8 months to enroll under the SEP with no penalty. But, and this is critical, if your employer has fewer than 20 employees, you do not get this protection. Small employer plans interact with Medicare differently, and Part B enrollment at 65 may still be required to avoid penalties. The employee count rule is one of the most overlooked details in Medicare enrollment, especially for people who work for small businesses, family businesses, or as the owner of their own company. Alright friends, let's bring this home with a checklist you can actually use this week. I want you to imagine we're sitting at your kitchen table together, coffee between us, a notepad open, and I'm walking you through 5 questions every person approaching 65 needs to answer. First, how many months until you turn 65? Mark your IEP window on a calendar right now. 3 months before your birthday, month through 3 months after. Write the closing date in red. That is your deadline, and Medicare will not remind you. Second, what type of health coverage do you currently have? This single question determines whether you qualify for a special enrollment period, your own active employer plan with 20 or more employees. SEP available. Everything else, IEP clock is running. Third, if you have employer coverage as an active worker, when do you plan to retire or leave that job? The 8-month special enrollment period begins the day your active employer coverage ends, not the day you retire, if those dates are different. Mark that day on your calendar and count forward 8 months. That is your SEP deadline. Fourth, have you contributed to an HSA in the past year, or are you currently contributing? If yes, make sure you understand the HSA stop rule before you enroll in any part of Medicare. Talk with a tax advisor about the timing, because contributing to an HSA after Medicare enrollment can trigger IRS penalties on top of everything else. Fifth, have you spoken directly with a licensed Medicare specialist, not just your HR department? Not just a general financial planner, but a Medicare specialist who knows the specific enrollment rules for your coverage situation? HR departments are excellent resources for understanding your current employer plan, but they are not always equipped to explain Medicare coordination rules, SEP qualifications, or the difference between dependent coverage and active worker coverage. Karen's HR department told her she did not need Medicare while she had her husband's plan. That was accurate advice for her medical bills. It was incomplete advice for her Medicare enrollment timeline. A Medicare specialist, a state health insurance assistance program counselor, known as SHIP, offers free Medicare counseling in every state, would have told her the complete picture. SHIP counselors are trained specifically on Medicare enrollment rules. They are free, they are available in every state, and they can tell you exactly which enrollment path applies to your specific coverage situation. These 5 questions will not make the decision for you, but they will make sure you are standing inside your enrollment window with the right information, not outside it, with a permanent penalty. Here's my challenge to you after this video. This week, find your birthday month and count out the 7-month IEP window on a calendar. Write the window opening and closing dates somewhere visible. If you are within 2 years of 65, do this today. Second, identify your current coverage type. Pull out your insurance card, and look at whose employer the plan comes from. Is it your active employer with 20 or more employees? Or is it a dependent plan, COBRA, retiree coverage, or marketplace? Third, if you are within 2 years of 65 and have not yet spoken with a SHIP counselor or Medicare specialist, make that call this week, not next month, this week. Frank made that call 6 months before his 65th birthday. It took 30 minutes. It saved him nearly $20,000 in lifetime Medicare premiums. Karen wished she had known about that call. Now she does, and she has been telling every friend approaching 65 to make it before the window closes. Medicare enrollment is not complicated once you understand the rules. It is only confusing when you discover them after the window has already closed. You can always earn more money. You cannot reopen a Medicare enrollment window that has already closed. Your health coverage in retirement is too important to leave to assumptions. Give it the 30-minute phone call it deserves before you turn 65, not after. If this helped you see your Medicare enrollment situation a little more clearly today, do 3 things for me. Hit that like button so YouTube shows this to more people approaching 65 who need to hear about the enrollment window before it closes, not after. Subscribe to The Quiet Retirement for more plain-spoken Medicare and Social Security explanations, the rules that actually affect your retirement income, in plain English, 1 video at a time. And in the comments, tell me, are you approaching 65 right now? Or have you already navigated Medicare enrollment and learned something the hard way? I read every comment, and your experience might save someone else from Karen's situation. I'm Uncle John, reminding you your money is important, but your time and your health are priceless. Let's use the rules to your advantage, not theirs. I'll see you in the next one.